Okay, great. Really excited to be here with everyone to talk a little bit about my academic journey and some tips for applying to grad school, if that's something that you're interested in. So I am a relatively new faculty member at Simon Fraser University. I joined the faculty and Department of Psychology in November 2021, so just a little over a year now. And I am in the neuropsychology stream of the clinical psychology program. I'm also an affiliate investigator at BC Children's Hospital Research Institute. So one of the nice things about being in this area is that there's so many fantastic people to collaborate. So I'll talk a little bit about some of those collaborations and at SFU and collaborations that I've been a part of across this journey. So I'm just gonna get started here. So I was born and raised in London, Ontario, and I decided to start my academic journey at Western University, formerly the University of Western Ontario, in 2008. And I was there for 4 years. I, like many people who go into psychology, just sort of started off thinking that I really like working with people. I'd like to help people in some way, but didn't really have, any real specific research or clinical interests really beyond that. Just psychology seems like it would be a good fit for me. And I think that's how most people sort of start off in their undergrad. And so I just started off in a general Bachelor's of Arts psychology program. I had always been sort of a keen student, really liked, learning and coursework. And so I think in my second year, I heard about the honor specialization program in psychology that probably some of you are either in now or thinking about, that gives students an opportunity to do an honors thesis project or a research project with a faculty member. And I had been told that that is a really good option if you want to go to grad school. So most people who want to go to grad school in psychology have to have an honors thesis. So I started taking the courses that would be required for me to get into the honors thesis program, but I didn't actually apply to that stream until my third year. And I was excited to get into that program. And then I had to start thinking about, well, who and what do I want to do for my honors thesis? And I had just looked up faculty at the University of Western to see what research was interesting to me. And I came across a faculty member who was doing twin research, actually, and doing behavioral genetics studies, looking at sort of the heritability and environmental factors that impact different traits. And I am an identical twin. And so I thought, oh, that's really relevant to me. So I'm going to see if I can join this person's lab. And he very graciously agreed to be my honors thesis supervisor. And I was lucky because I actually also got to work with a PhD trainee who was doing her PhD with my supervisor at the time. And I think I really benefited from having a PhD student also supervise me because they were really hands-on, or they helped me sort of think about science in a really deep, thoughtful way that I hadn't ever done before. And I think working with her really shaped sort of my interest in research and going on to pursue grad school. And she had talked about sort of all the things that she was doing in grad school, and it really interested me. And that's what I did in my fourth year. And at the same time, I thought it's probably a good idea to get some additional experience. So I did end up volunteering in another lab at the same time to help another undergrad student run participants for her honors thesis. And when I graduated, I wasn't really sure exactly what I wanted to do. I had learned that I really, really enjoyed research. And so that's something that I thought I might want to continue, but I wasn't really sure how or what that might look like. I'm a first-gen university student. So, my parents and my family, we didn't really have a lot of experience with university. But I loved the research. I really liked my neuroscience classes, but I also really liked my psychology and abnormal psych classes. So I was trying to decide sort of how I could combine those two things. And I actually went to see a career counselor and filled out one of those long forms about your personality and your interests. And one of the first jobs that came up on the sort of printout was clinical neuropsychologist. I had never heard of a clinical neuropsychologist. I didn't know what they did. So I looked it up. And it's the study of brain behavior relationships and doing assessments and diagnosing people that have disorders that might impact neurological functioning. And I thought that sounds perfect for me. So I was working in retail at the time, decided to look for jobs that might give me some experience, that might make me a successful applicant to these types of programs. And I was really lucky to get a job as a rehab counselor at a community agency that helped individuals who had severe traumatic brain injuries and who could no longer live independently. They would live at this community housing, and support workers would help them cook and clean and help them get back into the community and go to movies and go to events. So I was really lucky to get a job there working with people with traumatic brain injuries. And I just loved that work so much. So I decided going into a degree in clinical neuropsychology is going to be a good fit for me. And so I started applying to grad schools after my year off, and I applied specifically to schools that offered neuropsychology specialization like SFU and UVic and UWindsor, and I landed at the University of Windsor. And so I did my master's and my PhD there from 2013 to 2019. Interestingly, I actually didn't work with a faculty member who was doing TBI research. So that's what I thought I really wanted to do. When I went on my interviews, the person that I interviewed with seemed really clinically oriented and not as much interested in research. And that was something that I really wanted to get more of. So I ended up actually working with a faculty who wasn't doing TBI work, but who seemed like he'd be a better fit for my needs and my interests and my preferences in terms of research. So that actually got me into doing some of what I'm currently doing now, which is researching mindfulness-based interventions. So during my master's and PhD, I did a lot of work looking at the effectiveness of mindfulness-based interventions in different populations, like people with ADHD and university students. And I really, really love that. One of the interesting and nice things about a clinical psych degree is it's a professional degree and it's also a scientific degree. So you can become a clinician after, or you can go on to do a faculty position and do research, or some combination of both. And I really, really, really love that. That took me to, I did my clinical residency in Edmonton for a year. And then after I graduated, I came to UBC for a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship. And that's when I got back into my interest in TBI. So I decided I wanted to do some extra research training. That's pretty typical if you want a faculty position. So for 2 years, I was really focused on learning about psychosocial determinants of health after mild TBI and intervention development and clinical operations. And it just became really clear to me that a faculty position where I can do research and teach and mentor students was really the best fit for me over a full-time clinical position. And that's when I landed here at SFU. This is just a picture of my lab page. So I study concussion, outcomes, recovery, and tech interventions here at SFU. So that's just a sort of a brief overview, and now I'll just give a few tips, and then of course I can answer questions after as well. But some of my major tips for preparation would be, one, to make sure you take the appropriate classes in undergrad that you need. So if you think you want to go to grad school, make sure you're taking a look at that course calendar early and sort of planning out what you'd like to take. The other thing I would suggest is getting into a couple of research labs. That'll give you a sense of, do I like research? Is that the right sort of path for me? And what do I like to do? What am I interested in studying? What sort of methods, do I want to use to study this? And that'll also help you build relationships with faculty who can write you strong letters of reference. So I know that can be tricky when you get to this time and you're asking people for reference letters, is who are you going to ask for a strong letter? And getting into those labs and volunteering is going to ensure that you're able to get those strong letters. And then, like I mentioned, part of my work with a PhD trainee at the time really informed my decision to go to grad school. So find other mentors, other students interested in the field, whether they're other undergrads or grad students, and talk to them about their experience and what it's like. And then I'll just maybe finally, because I know we're short on time here, think about what sort of area you might want to study, right? I was really interested in neuropsychology, but there's lots of other areas like child psychology, forensic psychology, and I think we'll hear a little bit about more of those today, and just start some preparation early. So putting together those applications, it's a lot of work. So start thinking about those early, and even, you know, take some time off, a year off if that fits for you. I did that, and it was really helpful to get some research experience and some job experience that I think helped me be more successful in my applications. Okay, I'm going to stop there and let our next speaker go, so I'm not taking up too much time, but looking forward to answering any questions that people might have.
Unmuting. Thanks so much, Molly. It was great to hear more about your story, your path, and really great tips to the students in the audience. So thank you for starting us off in such a great way. So I'm Dr. Brianne Kent. Like Molly, I'm quite new to SFU as a professor. I started the Translational Neuroscience Lab also in 2021. So I've only been here for a couple of years as a professor. But I actually started my academic journey at SFU, where I did my undergraduate degree and was first introduced to research. So I had taken the required research methods course, thinking I was going to do a minor in psychology as I was going to head off to law school. That was the plan. And I just fell in love with the scientific method. I loved the course. I loved thinking about an experiment and a hypothesis, and you know, being able to ask a question that no one had asked in that way before, and really pushing the limits of our understanding and our knowledge. So I just fell in love with the process and contacted the professor of the course and just said, I love the course. You know, I'm thinking about wanting to get more research experience, potentially go to grad school. And she welcomed me into her lab. So I was a lab coordinator in a social psychology lab. So I'm a neuroscientist, my lab's a neuroscientist, but I actually got my start in research in a social psychology lab. And I learned really valuable research skills, even though that wasn't the topic that I was going to pursue and ended up pursuing in graduate school. I also conducted research in Ralph Misselberger's lab, and I did my honors thesis studying biological rhythms in rats, and I was also able to get a little bit of research experience in Neil Watson's lab. So over about a 3-year period as an undergraduate student, starting in my second year, all the way through to my 4th year, I was participating in 3 different labs at different times. When I was starting to think about graduate school and what to apply for, just from the readings that I had done in my classes, at that time, I was really interested in why women were more vulnerable to Alzheimer's disease. So why was it that more women had Alzheimer's disease? And why did this seem to change around menopause? So what was the role of sex hormones? Around this time too, at SFU, we had record-breaking rain. So we had 55 days of straight rain. And I just was thinking, well, if I'm going to go to grad school, I might as well go somewhere sunny. So I started looking at programs and schools, and I went down to California. I went to San Francisco, did a trip with my mom. We went and visited campuses. I met with some professors who were there, and I contacted them just to say, you know, I'm thinking about applying for graduate school. I'm going to be visiting the campus. Are you available to chat, to meet? And, you know, some of them were really welcoming and open to the idea of meeting a prospective student who was visiting the campus. And it was a great way to just, you know, for graduate school, if you're going to be moving somewhere, like I had never been to San Francisco, I'd never visited these campuses, and it was just a great way to experience where I might be applying to and might be moving to. Now, when I interviewed at Stanford and Berkeley, it was sunny and it was beautiful. And when I interviewed at Yale, it was like just storming and really snowy. And it was all within about the same week. And I ended up with this very difficult decision. I was very lucky, very blessed to have options of graduate school and some really great options. But it was a very difficult decision for me. So where do I go to graduate school? Yale had the professor and the lab that had the specific research question that I was most interested in, that I really wanted to pursue. Stanford also had great research, great professors, but sunshine and less rain and palm trees, and it was tempting. And I was also considering staying in Vancouver. It was home, my family's here, and I was going to go to UBC. UBC is a great university. So I ended up deciding to go to Yale and pursuing the specific research question that I was most interested in. 6 months into my program, and it was a 5-year PhD program, one of the American programs, my supervisor moves the entire lab to Milwaukee, and I am just devastated. I've just made this difficult decision, thinking that I'm going to be at Yale for 5 years, be working with this specific professor on this specific research topic, and she's moving to Milwaukee. I didn't really know where Milwaukee was. I was devastated. So I considered moving with her to her new lab. I considered staying at Yale and joining another lab and finding a new supervisor. And then I considered moving to another university because, you know, when you're pursuing a PhD, your research topic and your methods, you're working on it so hard for years, and you really want to make sure that it's the right fit, the right topic, the right lab. So if I'd stayed in the United States and moved to another program, even though at that point I would have been getting a master's degree at Yale, the American programs tend to be 5-year programs. And even if you have a master's program, you're starting another 5-year program. Whereas in Canada and the UK, if you have a master's degree, you can go right into a PhD program. And so the whole process is a bit more efficient. But in the United States, there tends to be easier funding. A lot of the big programs in the United States have full tuition support and a stipend while you're grad school. So the funding tended to be a little bit easier to get from programs in the US. In the end, it all worked out. I went to the University of Cambridge. I was able to get the Gates Scholarship, which is an international scholarship, because it is hard for international students to get funding in the UK, but the Gates Scholarship is one of the options for international students. And I did my PhD in the psychology department there and ended up having a really wonderful experience, even though it wasn't the initial plan. When I graduated in 2015, I came back to Vancouver and did a postdoctoral position at the University of British Columbia, and I actually got to work with neurologists. So most of my research in graduate school was preclinical work, working with mouse models of Alzheimer's disease mostly. And so for my postdoctoral work, I wanted to get the opportunity to work with patients who had Alzheimer's disease and working with clinicians who actually worked with the patients. Then I did a research fellowship at Harvard Medical School and then returned to SFU in 2021 to start my own lab. And I really couldn't be happier. So my piece of advice for you, if you're thinking about graduate programs, and like so often students are just saying, I don't know, I like research, I'm interested in so many different topics, I don't know what to apply to, who to apply to, I don't know what to do in grad school. So I tell students to ask themselves 3 questions. What is the question that you want to answer, or the issue that you most care about? So what is the question? 2, what is the methodology that you want to use? And 3, where do you want to live, or what school do you want to attend? Now, the importance of these questions changes depending on the student, because you could be somebody who just says, I love neuroimaging. I don't really care what question. I just really want to do fMRI neuroimaging. Or I really love stem cell biology and I want to create stem cell lines. Or I really want to understand Alzheimer's disease. I don't care if I'm studying it in a mouse or a human, in a cell line. I really want to understand this disease. Or I really want to go to this university and I love lots of different types of research, lots of different questions, lots of different methodologies I'd be happy doing, but like I really want to stay in Vancouver, or I really want to go to this particular university. So which question is most important to you is completely personal, and there's no right or wrong answer. But when you're trying to think about where you want to apply for graduate school, these are the questions that you should be thinking about. So that's it for me. Looking forward to the Q&A.
Right, so I'm just, thanks everyone for having me here today and for attending. I'm just gonna really preface this by saying that, you know, this is just gonna be my experience with grad school. there are really just so many paths to get to where you want to go in life and to achieve your goals and your career goals. This can be through gap years, going to grad school, not going to grad school. There's really just one way to skin a cat and to get to where you want to go career-wise. So this is my way. This isn't the only way. This isn't the best way. And ultimately, everything I say, everything everyone is saying today, it's all kind of just with a grain of salt. You ultimately have to do with what's best for you and what feels most real and personable to you. I'm sure you're already feeling overwhelmed and stressed enough with all these choices, so I'm about to make it more stressful as your third presenter. So a little bit about me. So after a failed attempt and interest to pursue theoretical physics, I ended up attending Langara from 2016 to 2018, where I really just enrolled in classes that sounded interesting or sounded neat. These included philosophy courses, ancient medieval history courses, as well as an intro course to psychology and a research methods course in criminology. Now, in the criminology course, I learned about psychopathy, and I really just started liking psychology. And these ended up being two really big interests of mine that persisted on into Langara. From that, I took more courses in criminology and psychology and found out that I really started liking the field. I heard that if you kind of mash the two together, you would get something called forensic psychology. And I heard that SFU had a pretty good program in psychology, and specifically forensic psychology. So I jumped on transferring to SFU in 2018, where I attended there and graduated with my bachelor's of honors in psychology and an extended minor in criminology. So at SFU as an undergrad, I did research with Dr. Micah Helmus, as well as Dr. Evan McQueish. And this was actually under the Department of Criminology. So all of my research experience up until my graduate career was actually in the criminology department. I did do, however, some independent research with Dr. Kevin Douglas. And this was primarily because I had to stalk him to get his attention, because I'm sure, as all of you may know, it's really difficult to find lab openings and research availability in the psychology department. It's a hot commodity. So throughout SFU, with a few major identity crises relating to whether I should even do an honors, because that was never really my first intention. I was hoping to do a double major in criminology and psychology, and then deciding on whether I should even go to grad school and if it was in criminology or psychology. I eventually applied to graduate school, and I'm now chugging my way along as of 2021. So now I'm in my second year, and I'm working with Dr. Kevin Douglas. So during my undergrad career, I was a peer support facilitator at Langara College. I TA'd at Langara College, as well as at SFU now. So this has been for 6 years and 3 years respectively. I've been a guest lecturer. I've also was a tutor at some points for SFU and Langara students in psychology, criminology, sociology, and philosophy. And I was a volunteered and paid research assistant. Did some independent directed studies, and then I taught dance. Now, as well as doing most of those things, I do my practicum at Correctional Services Canada, where I actually work with offenders in conducting psychological assessments, diagnostic assessments, and do group therapy there. I still do the research, the manuscript, and continue to take classes full time. So looking back at my undergraduate career, I really had no idea on what I wanted. I really knew I had 5 things. I had 5 things that I knew. I knew I wanted to stay in Canada. I knew that I was open to teaching and doing research. I knew that I wanted to interview and study and assess offenders. Specifically, I wanted to do risk assessments, so assess their likelihood to commit new crimes. And I knew that to do this, I needed to be specialized in a relevant field. So to me, that sounded like criminology or psychology. And to be specialized, I needed to go to grad school. At the time, I decided sounds like a grad school path. And with deciding between psychology and criminology. You clearly know where I was headed off to, and I'll explain why later. I decided to shoot my shot at grad school just about 3 to 4 weeks before the application deadline and apply. And that was largely because the standardized testing was waived the year I applied. So these thoughts that I had at the time of applying were pretty broad. It was a long time struggle deciding between whether I should go into grad school in criminology or psychology, because ultimately they both get me to basically where I want to go. But what's going to really give me the best option? And so this is what I see when giving these talks before and speaking with other students is they're not really sure where to go. Is it from a clinical perspective or a counseling perspective? So just really briefly, I think it's just helpful to chat. Counseling psychology, it's about a 2-year postgraduate training. So after you graduate, you'll apply. And you're typically working in schools and are less focused on mental disorders. You're going to have more focus on helping clients address emotional, social, and physical stressors in their lives. And you're often working with psychologically stable individuals. You're usually maybe working in school settings or as career counselors. As a clinical psychologist, this is the reason why most of us are here, is for job availability. You can work at universities, being a researcher, but you can also be a clinician. The training is much longer. It's about a 5 to 8 year training post-grad. They say 5 years, people graduate mostly in 7. And there's a heavy focus on mental disorders. So you're going to be working with people who have much more severe mental disorders. You're going to become an expert in psychological theories and most distinguishably assessments. So something psychologists can do that no one else can do is actually assess and diagnose disorders. Counselors cannot do that. Psychiatrists cannot assess as well as we can. So you're ultimately becoming a diagnostician. You're not prescribing medication though. So with that, I wanted to work with offenders and people with severe mental disorders. And I wanted to assess, I didn't really care what assessments they were. I just knew I wanted to do assessments. So that made it pretty clear to me that I wanted to go into clinical. So if you're interested in working with individuals who have more severe mental illnesses, or if you're interested to help people through therapy, but are also interested in assessment, that's a clinical question. If you're interested in teaching as well, or more research focused, that's also a clinical program. So in terms of applications, applications look at grades, your clinical experience, and your leadership and teaching experience. They also want to see that you're going to be a well-rounded researcher. So considering the quality of your research experiences. So not just doing data entry, but always trying to seek opportunities with more responsibility behind them. So not just getting volunteer positions to fill up your resume or your CV, but actually taking time to learn what you want and the type of people you want to work with. This is a time where you can choose and allow yourself to be a little bit picky and gain more responsibility. Again, trying to do some independent work as well through an honors or directed studies is great too. So grad school is hard. It can be discouraging at times. You're going to have all-nighters. You're going to miss out on opportunities with loved ones. And do you have a life? Not really, but to a degree, your life really becomes grad school. Because of grad school, I have been able to travel internationally to conferences to share my research with people, and I've been able to visit countries that I never thought I would otherwise. Grad school means that my life has ultimately become embedded with my education. So the hardships I've had, and trust me, I've had a laundry list of them over the past year and a half. My poor supervisor has stuck them out with me, but these hardships have now become embedded into my academics, where if I need to put something on pause, it's seen as okay, and I can do what I need to do and pick up when I need to pick up. This is a time where people may get married or have children, or family members may pass. These are times where life moves with your education and you embed it as one. So honestly, as a whole, the past 2 years have really pushed me to grow as a researcher, a clinician, and as a person more than anything else. So yeah, that's about all I have. Really take a mindful of what you're doing and making sure this is something for you, because at the end of the day, it's a long-term commitment.
So yeah, without further ado, yeah, I'm Ryan. I'm finishing up my master's in cognitive and neurosciences with Dr. Richard Wright in the Vision Lab. So I'll go into, there we go, a little bit about what we do. So we study how attention, or mainly a lack thereof, can affect the efficiency of visual processing. So we use methods like the flicker task, which is a demonstration that I have here in this image. Just be warned that the image is going to be flashing. So I'm going to go ahead and play it, and you guys can go ahead and see if you can find what's changing in this image. So changes normally have cues and kind of transients that capture our attention, but this repeated annoying flashing is preventing that from happening, and it makes this a difficult task. By seeing what kinds of changes are more noticeable, we can learn about how attention is applied when we look around in the world. In this case, the changes to Batman's little pumpkin bucket there. You guys can spot that. I'll go ahead and stop this so it's not annoying you the whole way through. Focusing more on what I'm doing specifically, generally I'm looking at how attention is needed to both kind of encode the location of an object's features and then properly kind of integrate those features together so we're able to perceive objects accurately. I've been kind of working on this since the fall of 2019. That's when I started my grad school experience, and you'll note that that was right before everything got shut down for the COVID pandemic. So my grad school experience looked a little more like this. I spent the majority of it at home in front of my computer in my pajamas. Although the situation wasn't really ideal, I did spend that time learning how to program things, build new experiments up from scratch, and then pilot test myself on them to see if they'd work. When labs were able to open up again, I actually found that I had a whole bunch of experiments that were pretty much just ready to go. So it wasn't really the ideal situation. You don't want to be stuck kind of waiting like that, but I did learn from it that spending time planning and preparing your experiments can really help to get things running smoothly afterwards. The last thing you want is to find an issue with your experiments, your methodology sometime later down the road, and then have to backtrack and figure out how to fix it later in your program when it might be too late. So not everyone conducts research in the same way as me. We have all these different labs here at SFU. So not everyone was kind of shut down to the same extent as my lab was during the pandemic. And I spent a fair bit of time feeling like I was kind of falling behind. But it's important to remember that everyone's grad school experiences are going to be different. So you can't compare yourself to other people. Your project is going to come with its own challenges, its own kind of schedule that you'll be working by. So I think I'll just move right into the stuff that you guys are probably here for the most part, which are kind of the tips and tricks for getting into grad school in the first place. This slide is, I'm going to stay on here because it's actually fairly appropriate. You really want to make sure, first of all, that grad school is the right path for you. Some of other presenters have mentioned this already, but you've got a lot of options as far as what you want to do. And grad school is a big undertaking and quite the endeavor, and you want to make sure you're up for it. You want to make sure you're passionate. And so a great way to kind of see if it's what you want to do with your life is to volunteer in one or more of all of these different labs that we have at SFU. You can kind of get your dip your toe into the water, find out what sort of topics interest you, and talk to the grad students there and kind of learn from their experiences and see what kind of advice they might have. An honors project will also give you an even clearer glimpse into what grad school is like, because you basically write and defend a paper kind of similar to a master's, just kind of on a smaller scale. So these experiences are doubly useful because if you do decide to go into grad school, you're going to need around 3 or so reference letters for your application, and you'll want to get to know about 3 professors who can provide strong references for you. This means it's not really enough to just, sit in the back of the class and get an A. You kind of want to make an impression so that the professor knows you and can say something about why you might be a good grad school student. If you don't have any interactions with them, then what will they have to write about you? So a good way to start off is just getting involved in class. Asking questions and trying to speak up and be vocal is good, but some of us would frankly rather die than talk in class. So you can also stick around afterwards to go to office hours or chat with the professor kind of in a more private setting. If you like a prof and you find their work interesting, then you could see if they're hiring any research assistants for their lab, or maybe if they'd be interested in doing a directed studies course, or as mentioned before, an honors with you. These are good ways to really get to know a prof and build up a rapport and stuff. And then nice little bonus is that a reference letter usually comes along with that. I would extend this advice actually to finding a supervisor for grad school as well. If you just send in an application, you're basically just a name on a page. There's nothing really differentiating you from anybody else. Reaching out beforehand with just an email or something is a really good way to make you just stand out as an actual human being rather than just a name or a number, and show that you're actually interested in your work. If you think about it from their perspective, a prof would probably prefer to work with someone they like and they know that they get along with, rather than just whoever has the highest GPA. One thing that does often get kind of forgotten in all this excitement to try and get in anywhere you can, just get into grad school, is that you want to make sure that this is going to work for you as well. You want to make sure the professor and their lab is going to be a good fit. Some supervisors are going to be more hands-on than others. Some of you will actually enjoy that guidance. Others want to have a little bit more freedom. If you can, it would be also a good idea to contact the grad students in that lab and then ask them about what it would be like working there to see if it's an environment that you'd want to be a part of. So it goes both ways. You want to make sure that it's kind of going to be a good experience for you. Really, that's about all I have for you guys. So thank you very much for paying attention.